biggest thing for me would be climate change. I just see that as an insidious and huge effect worldwide, and it has a lot of strings to it. It includes things like sea level change, it includes intensifications of desert, loss of biodiversity, whole range of issues, but it has the potential to impact us hugely internationally. In Canterbury, a kind of a smaller expression of that, I suppose, is really water quality, what's happening to our rivers and lakes. We are seeing increasing amounts of nitrate in our groundwaters, and unfortunately some of the groundwater will take 50-60 years to actually reach the coast. So the problem's going to be with us for a long time yet, even if we cleaned up our act now. And it often goes hand in hand with water abstraction, taking a lot of water out of rivers for irrigation. So with the loss of waters and the increasing nutrient, we're putting our aquatic ecosystems under huge pressure. Yeah, I remember looking back at John 3:16 to be one of perhaps the most well-known verse in the Bible. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And I think it was Yonggi Cho who actually first sort of highlighted that in the sermon, saying, for him also suddenly his eyes lit up. It just didn't, what it said, God so loved the world. It didn't just say God so loved, his creation of mankind. There's something special about what God has created. And I think one of the real misinterpretations really of Genesis, where the old King James Version I think talks about filling the earth and subduing it. And somehow we've got that concept of subduing it wrong. It's talking about trusteeship, it's talking about stewardship, about wise and sustainable management. We have taken that as a mandate to go out there and rape and pillage, cut down trees, to do things which are unsustainable. I mean, I've heard people say, well, if we're going to hell in a handbasket, maybe that's not a bad thing because it'll hasten the second coming of Christ. Something, and I'm thinking, good night. I mean, surely people don't really believe that. But there are some people that just have that sort of concept that what really matters is Christ coming again, and are we ready? Of course that matters, but there's also a whole question of how we live in the meantime. I'd like to think that yes, the church can be a forerunner in this, and say we have responsibilities, we have a mandate to look after, to govern the earth. We are trustees. Being green and being a Christian are quite compatible, and it's quite it's just a rebalancing of what had become a significant imbalance. We have a young grandson who's the absolute love of my life. Amongst my wife and fishing and a few other things. But every now and then I look at that wee fella and I just think, what sort of legacy are we handing on to that generation? And that's partly why I really endorse the concept that Māori have, that I'm not living my life here and now for what I can get out of it. And it's not even my children who are going to benefit, but it's my mokopuna, my grandchildren. We're looking at 2 or 3 generations ahead. And I think we need to grasp those sort of principles a lot more.
We've probably had a diminished view of the value of creation, probably inheriting thoughts from Plato and Greek dualism. We've almost come to an idea that salvation means simply our going to heaven when we die, rather than seeing that God's redemption involves the reconciliation of all things. We've probably had a diminished view of the creation story, that we start with basically with our sin, but we forget that before sin there was a further backstory that involved God's mandate for humanity to be good stewards of creation. But we haven't really wrestled with the idea that the only mandate God gave to humanity before sin was to be good stewards of his creation. It would seem grossly unfair of God to call humanity to this one primary task of looking after his creation, for him to then just undo it all in the end. That seems that God is working against his calling for us as humanity. There is a verse in 1 Peter that gives the impression that it's all going to burn. You possibly, if you look up later versions of the Bible, you'll see that word burn's been taken out. Scholarship has come to the understanding that that's not a good translation. And so later versions will use the term laid bare in the sense of all the bad ways that humanity has invested in creation will be burned up. It's a metaphor of cleansing rather than of destruction. It's interesting that Jesus himself says that the renewal of all things. Peter in his Pentecost speech talks about the restoration of all things. And Paul in chapter 8 of Romans talks about creation longing for its own liberation. It will come into the freedom of the children of God as well. And so we have missed that point, I think, for so long in the Christian church. We've had the idea it's all going to burn, therefore why invest in it? Investing in creation care is God's mandate for us. And so if that's God's mandate for us, surely we must have a good future ahead, including a renewed creation. In fact, we talk about the new creation. The word there is a Greek word kainos, which means new in kind, not new altogether. It's not a brand new. Neos would be the word that would be used to convey that. The Greek text points us to renewed creation rather than a replaced creation. My call would be for people to read the beginning of their Bibles really, really well and say, what does it mean to be human? Not what does it mean to be Christian, what does it mean to be human? Being Christian is that we're a follower of Christ so that we can be more fully human, more fully the image of God in the world that he created us to be in the beginning. That to me is really important. Get our beginning right in order to get our end right. So important.
So I think the church has probably traditionally had a big focus on personal salvation. So I guess maybe the phrase God so loved the world has been intuitively made to be God so loved me, that he sent his only son. And so salvation becomes about saying the sinner's prayer, 4 spiritual laws, and if anything around creation care is ever mentioned, it's usually as an attachment to the faith.
In terms of what's happening in the world today, it's the most vulnerable people who are getting really affected by pollution, by the things that we've done to this world, and we don't have a close proximity to see the impacts of what we're doing. We're dissociated from the impact of our action, and I think that's also why the church doesn't really take it seriously. When God created the world, and before humans were even created, he said that it was good. And so there's this relationship between God and the world that he's created that is a bit of a mystery, but that has intrinsic value without us. And so I think that's one of the big reasons for creation care, is that this is part of God's creation that he has a relationship with that we don't actually value or talk about much.
So I think creation care as well for the church is part of what God is doing to bring his kingdom on earth. That's what we pray in the Lord's Prayer. Your kingdom come, your will be done. And as we look back and look forward to where things are heading, we see this shalom. So surely it means that part of our responsibility as the church participating in this kingdom coming is that we're also seeing that peace of God with the world, with creation, and peace of humanity with the world.
I think there's a big need for our physical spaces to actually be environmentally friendly, from our cleaning products to the source of energy. I think that's a really practical thing that we can do. And as well as our homes, I think individually people can make really wise decisions about how they look in terms of caring for the environment, and that bears witness to Christ. Another element within the practical and the theological is to ensure that there's songs where we're praising God for the creation that he has created, where we are doing retreats, where we are up in the mountains looking out. I think lots of people experience God's presence in the grandeur of creation and the grandness. And I think we have to give those opportunities, because lots of people live in cities and so they don't experience God's presence in those spaces. And I think that's really important, to encourage people to look at the stars and to peel back to a really basic appreciation and wonder at what God has created.